Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Rad Friends podcast, where we explore life's thorniest questions with a rad friend. Today's question is, should you play status games? And I'm joined by my dear, dear friend, another podcaster, Jenny Blake. I'm going to do a quick intro. Jenny is an author and podcaster. She's the author of 4 books and she hosts 2 podcasts. And my little addition is she is a former Googler. How's it going, Jenny?
It's amazing. I'm so happy you're doing this. I've loved all the conversation so far, and I'm utterly honored and delighted to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was saying you've by the way been a podcast inspiration of mine, always sending me so many amazing episodes. I've been on your podcast 3 or 4 times.
4 times, I think. We even have our own special Spotify playlist.
Yes, which we will share in the link. So what was that? What is the thing that it's like a former Googler. It's an ex-Oogler.
Zoogler.
Zoogler. Okay.
But it's spelled with an X. So yeah.
Okay.
Zoogler.
So I should have done this before, a Zoogler. So we will talk about that. But first, I know you have a lovely German Shepherd. What's your dog's name?
Ryder.
So you're walking around Central Park, or you're in the Harlem area, north of Manhattan. You meet someone in the dog park, and they're like, "Oh, how do you spend your days, Jenny?" How do you answer that question?
You're looking at it. I spend a lot of my time with Ryder outside, just like you said. And whenever we have our spontaneous phone catch-ups, I'm usually outside with Ryder in the grass. And I forgot who said it, but I think it was Milan Kundera, Tim Ferriss linked to it, that like absolute paradise is to be sitting in the grass with a dog, like literally what I do every day. And there was early days of spending my time like that. Sometimes it could be up to 3 hours a day between the various walks and outings, where I used to be self-conscious because he's 3.5 now. And I would think, oh no, am I spending too much time taking care of Ryder? Is this interfering with my business? And just over time, I've realized that's the best use of my time. It's the best way I spend my time. When I'm not taking Ryder out or traipsing through New York City, I am usually podcasting. I have 2 shows. I produce 14 episodes a month. That takes up the most of my time. And then bits and bobs around that. So the main thing, I'm starting the secret writing project. So I do a little bit of writing every day, but maybe 5% compared to how much time I spend podcasting.
Wow.
I have a private community. So some private community management stuff too.
Amazing. And tell us describe your latest book is Free Time, and listening to you talk, you 2 to 3 hours a day with your dog. So you have, by many definitions, a lot of free time. But tell our listeners what's free time? What's the gist of Free Time, your latest book?
The subtitle is Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business. And that's really just it. I mean, even if you're not running your own business or you want to someday, the whole crux of the book is how do we move from friction to flow? And how do we free up more time, seeing free time even as a verb, it's a skill we can grow, that we can get better at freeing our time through smarter systems. And I do that in the book through a 3-stage free time framework: align, design, assign. So align is this work you should be doing at all, designing the flow of that work and your ideal outcomes and process. And then assign is usually the hardest for me and other people, which is delegating it, making sure you're not the bottleneck in your business or your creative projects.
I love that. And would you say, so align, design, and what was the third one?
Assign.
Align, design, assign. You're so good at naming things. And so I wanted to ask you about the align, right? So many of our questions, that's actually a great, a good follow-up episode, but so many of our listeners are misaligned, right? They're, the analogy that always comes up is hamster wheel. I'm on this treadmill of creating content if I'm an internet creator, or if I'm a lawyer or a consultant, I'm traveling all of the time. And so there's this lack of alignment. how does free time talk about this question of, living in alignment?
Well, even going back to Pivot, which is my second book, I open with somebody saying, I just don't know what's wrong with me. I think I'm going crazy. And it's followed by saying, I have the perfect on paper job. Why can't I just be happy? And sometimes I think we are ambitious. Anybody reading RadReads or listening to this probably has ambitions and goals and dreams. And so sometimes we set out and we actually achieve those. And maybe it is satisfying for a while, but inevitably, if you're high net growth, as I would say in Pivot, you want to keep learning and growing and challenging yourself. So sometimes we start aligned with a goal or project or a job or even our entire business, and then it gets out of alignment, just like you would need to tune up a car and take it in at regular intervals. And then sometimes things shift in the external environment, in the economy, in the company, with the people you're surrounded by, and you get pivoted or you have to realign almost in a reactive way. And then where free time comes in is that sometimes we're just doing too much. So it's also possible that you've taken on so much that you feel either like you're on a hamster wheel, like you said, or you're just grinding toward burnout. I call it the burdensome bees. You're either getting bored, bottlenecked, burned out, or buried by bureaucracy. And those are the red flags that eventually lead you to feel like you need to burn it all down and start from scratch and just pivot into, maybe I should just go get a job. I've even had this thought, go get a job bagging groceries at or being a barista at Starbucks, where you're like, I can't stand it anymore. How do I find my way back to simplicity? So that aligned stage it's not one and done. It's something that we need to continually check in with about the context of our career and business so that we realign and usually eliminate things. I mean, it usually does involve saying no to good things so you can free up that space to do whatever your heart is calling you to next.
Ooh, I love that, saying no. And so, the question of burnout has actually come up in a few of these episodes. And I think it was Anne-Laure LeCunff who said, burnout is like everyone feels burnt out always. It feels like the perpetual state of existence for many people. You probably being one of the exceptions, but our end, this question of burnout, there's Anne-Laure mentioned in two ways. There's questions of burnout from an external demand. So a demanding boss or a bad commute or, some kind of external circumstance that is out of your control. But what Anne-Laure said is the deeper side of burnout actually comes from within. So it's kind of self-directed burnout. And oftentimes that is that recalibration of ambition, something that, you and I talk about often, parenting, status chasing, which we're going to talk about later. How do you think of the question of alignment to burnout, but really what part of burnout is imposed upon you and what part of burnout do we bring upon ourselves?
It's hard to say. And I've been through so many cycles of burnout, crash, recover, burnout, crash, recover. And sometimes the reason I've burnt out is actually almost as a product of my success. And so I'm really interested in talking to people about what if your thing worked and all of a sudden you have this huge inflow coming your way or attention, or you finally wrote the book you'd been dreaming about for 20 years and then you burn out in the process of marketing it, and I know that we use burnout somewhat loosely and that some clinicians might disagree with certain applications of the word, but I think we all know what that feels like, to be so exhausted. You can't imagine doing anything at all, let alone creative or strategic work. And even that feeling, I know that resentment can be one of the flags and signals of burnout. And like sometimes I've been in a mode where just friends texting me makes me jumpy and antsy. Like, why does everybody need something from me? That was a while ago. I'm not experiencing that exact form of it right now, but I think that it's an interesting mix. I mean, we're in a culture where just to have healthcare, you need to work a lot. Or if you run your own business, it can be quite expensive. If you're working for a full-time job, I mean, I personally feel like the 40-hour work week is not designed with anybody's health in mind or even
Yeah.
family well-being. It's designed for the factory system. It is
Mhm.
designed to benefit the company you work for. But if given the choice, I don't think any of us would necessarily choose 40 to 50 plus hours for our own individual health and thriving. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
joke that my body has me on a short leash because if I start veering too far from my own alignment, my body kicks my ass one way or another. Like
Mhm.
I I'll get vertigo and I can't stand up straight. I'll get really terrible asthma and I can't sleep through the night. I'll lose my voice. I'll get a raging ear infection. Like these are the signals that are often coming a little late, but it's kind of the body's last resort to say, wake up. You have to stop and slow down and rest and recover and ideally recalibrate to figure out how do we do things a little differently. So I think to
Yeah.
answer your question, where does it come from? I think it comes from all sides, honestly. And I
Mhm.
know that for so many of us, myself included, a lot of the last few years has been trying to get up and function every day while still processing so much of the extra stress and pressure that the last few years have brought.
Mhm. Yes. I think about that with the like, is your body giving you signs?
Mhm.
So I think I said this on to Anne Laure, but I've been believe it or not, a bit of an anxious person, mostly because I'm very heady. And so I'm always kind of everything's running a million miles an hour in my head. And I've been like that since I was a kid. And so I've been grinding my teeth since I was 13 years old. And I
Mm.
basically like ground off, like you go to the dentist, you could see like I've ground off the top of basically all my enamels. I'm pretty low. I'm so much
Mm.
lower stress than I am now. But I went to the dentist last week, 8 years after I left Wall Street. And it was the first time the dentist said, it looks like you've stopped actually grinding.
Wow.
And so it just blows my mind, like how much the body gives you signals. And I'm turning 44 in a few weeks. And it's like my body's finally like, at least from a teeth and grinding perspective, it's like, okay, you're in a healthier place. And I can't imagine the other signals that I've avoided or kind of neglected or both subconsciously or consciously in the past, 44 years.
Well, and it's interesting timing too, considering that you wrote so publicly and honestly about your big business pivot that was almost exactly 6 months ago. So I don't know if you go to the dentist every like twice a year, as my mom always made me do.
I
But it's
do.
also interesting that, yeah, so it's this visit that he said that to you. And it's
Mm.
6 months after you
Yeah.
shifted in a new direction and kind of downsized in a way in response to the
Hmm.
market and the business and direction you were heading. And so I don't know, that may have something to do with
Yeah.
it too, but I'm really happy for you.
I think too, I mean, one thing, I was on a mastermind kind of business retreat with a bunch of entrepreneurs. And one of the folks there was really into the world of somatics. And
Mm.
so for those of you, I didn't know what that word meant, but it's basically the body or listening to your body. I'm probably butchering it, so apologies there. But so there are all these heady people, like 8 heady people and one kind of feeling person. And so someone would say something like, I'm really struggling to find a new, how to grow my business. I'm really struggling if my team's the right size. And that would be, and then people would say like, well, have you thought about budgets? Have you thought about this? And kind of all these heady questions. And the other person would be, what do you feel when you
Mhm.
think about the employees? And I think everyone, even myself, was like, oh, what do you mean? What do you feel? Like, you don't feel employees, right? And I think for me, part of the phase of life that I'm in is to really start to listen to my body more. And so, for example, like mindless eating, I was like mindlessly eating shelled pistachios the
Mm.
other day. They're so dangerous because you don't have to like actually take the time to take the shells off. And I was just mindlessly eating. And then I paused, like, what? I'm not even tasting what I'm eating. And so I kind of went into my body, which is not something I'm used to doing. And it's like, what am I feeling right now? And I was like feeling like a side in my pain and all that. And I was like, I don't really need I don't need another
Mm.
pistachio now. So a side tangent on just kind of, I feel there are definitely different groups of people. There are heady people and there are feelers, but I feel like those worlds, there's more of an awareness on both parties now. I don't know if you've
It was
seen
a
that.
it was a literal side tangent to go with your pain in your side story.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I am really big on about 10 years ago, I wrote a blog post called Your Body is Your Business. That if you're self employed, your body you are your business. I mean, no matter what size team you have, if your body is depleted, exhausted, hungover, sleep deprived, carrying stress and tension, there's no way you're functioning at peak creativity and strategic thinking that you would need to run your business. And so it's just a reminder. I think when you're self-employed, it's hard to coast in the sense that, well, there's two places you can coast. When you're self-employed, it's harder to coast because if you're not in top condition, the balance sheet will pretty quickly mirror that for you, and you won't be able to show up to do the work. When you're working in a company, as I was for 7.5 years total, but 5.5 at Google, you can coast in a different way, which is that your body might be giving you signals, but you don't really have to screech to a halt because you're still getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. I know I suppressed a lot of the stress that I was carrying. It wasn't even in my conscious radar. And I remember one time I went to the dermatologist. And by the way, they're always prescribing pills. It was never like, oh, are you eating sugar and dairy? Yes, I was. Nobody ever said that to me. And like so many prescription drugs to address this problem. But one of the things the dermatologist said was, are you stressed at work? And can you lower your stress? And I laughed. I'm thinking, that's a joke. If I'm going to lower my stress to try to take better care of my skin, there was no way I could have done that to the extent I would have needed within the context of my full-time job. And it wasn't until I left, I moved to New York City, I started my business, I changed my lifestyle, I stopped working by 2 or 3 p.m. every day, even then. And all the health problems I had at the time cleared up. And I didn't need the medications. I didn't even need my inhaler until 10 years later when I just got COVID at the start of this year. And it triggered my childhood asthma, but it had completely cleared up.
It's amazing that something similar happened to me with high blood pressure, where I went to the doctor and she was extremely, extremely concerned. I also have white coat syndrome. So when you get really nervous going into the doctor, so it automatically spikes your blood pressure. But the doctor said, you have to get on medication right now. She almost wouldn't let me leave the office.
Wow.
And I had a friend who's more of a spiritual healer, but also has a background in different types of modalities of medicine. And she said that absolutely not. Like, let's, just try measuring it at your house for a while. So I started measuring it and I realized that it was much lower when I'm in my house. It's at the same time. There's not a doctor staring over me. That was one thing. I tried all these other things. Long story short, the thing that changed it for me was adding 2 hours of sleep a night. So I went from kind of 7 hours a night of sleep to 9 hours of sleep. And it just literally disappeared. Just like that.
And is this while you were self-employed or while you were working in finance?
This was 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
So it was
sleep and everything.
And you could see, and so crazy with blood pressure because you can see it every time. The other thing that it happened to me also with sugar. I was pre-diabetic, so my A1C was quite high. And again, they weren't pushing medication, but they're like, oh, just eat less sugar. But it's actually not that simple. It's less processed food. It's what time you eat, how you combine fats with sugar and all of that. And so after a year, I cut out all these things: sugar, refined carbs, beer, wine, for a year. And then it completely went down naturally.
Amazing.
So it's just amazing. We're on a tangent of health, but the body has so much awareness. And I think a lot of our listeners are very heady, like me, very cerebral. And just a nudge, an invitation that you can actually just pay attention to the things that you're feeling, and it might unlock unlock some things that will surprise you. So, all right, let's pivot to no pun intended, Jenny's book,
Great
Pivot,
product placement. Yeah.
let's pivot to our question for today. Should you play status games? So I'd ask you if there were any kind of stories or quirks or memes or things that were that were relevant to the topic du jour. What did you find for us?
Okay. Well, I found something, a good nugget, and then it made me think of another one. So a couple pieces of news have come out before the time of this recording.
Yeah.
One of them is that Spotify is not renewing Meghan Markle and Harry's podcast for a second year. They had given her a $20 million contract. She produced 12 episodes of Archetypes. And I'm not a Meghan and Harry hater. I have followed their story. I read Spare. I listened to Meghan's podcast. I watched their Netflix show. I'm not a royal fanatic by any stretch, but I am fascinated by their journey. And I do think that it would be incredibly difficult to have as much scrutiny on any one of us as they've had. Okay. But there was this little bit of information that came out that it turns out, now this is a rumor, but it was rumored that Meghan only interviewed the celebrities herself, not the guest experts that were woven in. And maybe she interviewed some of the experts, but it was clear that producers had handled some of the rest. And this is all hearsay, but something about that just didn't sit well with me and didn't sit well with, I think, a lot of people. Of course, there are some people who will use any bit of news or information or rumor to just throw her under the bus. But here's the thing. It's like, what message does that send that the celebrities are worth your time, and yet the experts, the academics, are not? And I don't know. You never know what somebody has going on. So let's say if she didn't interview a single expert, that's pretty bad. It's kind of like not a great status game. Maybe life stuff came up and she had to delegate a few, and then we would cut her some slack. But it just made me think about our relationship and how I know people who were only ever interested in networking upward. Like, they look over your shoulder at conferences, and I've been to these conferences, and I've been the one where someone's looking over my shoulder. Who else is here? Who else is in the room? Who else should I be talking to? And I've probably done that myself. I've probably been in that position where it's like, ooh, who else is here? And so I think I want to start by saying nothing that I'm going to say today is something that I'm excused from. It's just interesting to notice these patterns. But the second little bit that I wanted to share comes from a profile of Sarah Jessica Parker in The New Yorker. And if it's okay with you, Kay, I'd love to read an excerpt.
Yes, please.
Okay. So Sarah Jessica Parker has licensed her name to Shoots. The shop is called SJP. It's a boutique in the West Village. They have one at South Street Seaport. And so the New Yorker profile writer, Rachel Syme, goes and observes Sarah Jessica Parker in action, because she actually works in the shop 1 or 2 days a week, which in itself is pretty incredible.
Oh.
Okay, so the reporter writes, her voice, forever the voice of Carrie Bradshaw, was girlish. Her demeanor was hyper attentive. When she spoke, she placed a hand on her collarbone, a gesture of humble entreaty. She disappeared into a basement stockroom and returned with a size 40 for the customer. She squatted down in front of her. It is uncanny to watch a person of immense wealth and fame, even a shoe-loving one, choose to cradle a stranger's feet. But Parker was clearly relishing the shopgirl role. You shouldn't have to struggle this hard, she said as she tried to coax the shoe over the customer's heel. Parker leapt up and pivoted around, leaving a little swirl in the pile of the carpet. And that customer ended up saying that it was some of the best customer service she had ever received. So here's the reporter pointing out that to watch Sarah Jessica Parker on her hands and knees, touching a stranger's foot to put these shoes on, like, just the contrast of these two stories is pretty mind-blowing to me and has all kinds of status implications.
Wow. Beautiful. And so what status implications do you see in those stories?
Well, I think what's so fascinating about SJP is that how many of us, if we made it to her level of fame and celebrity, would ever work a day in a shop, even if our name was attached? I mean, very few. And then within those, how many of us would get on our hands and knees and go to the basement and go grab a pair of shoes for a customer? Like every single level of the customer interaction, she is saying to herself and the world, I'm not better than this. I'm not above this. I'm in this. I'm here. I'm like going to see this through A to Z. And she doesn't have to do that. And I also read that she doesn't take selfies with people, but she will talk to you. She'll say, if you want to chat with me, not going to do a selfie. So I guess it's this special case of humility when it seems like for some people, the more status they get, like almost the more bossy, the more demanding, the more exclusive. And it really, I don't know, I find it striking and wonderful to read these stories of somebody who is doing the opposite.
Yeah, I love that story. I don't know much about Sarah Jessica Parker, SJP, but it's funny that, and anytime I have kind of an immediate reaction to something, I always question like what's really happening there. And so my immediate reaction as you were reading that is like perfect PR campaign. It's like she knows the writer, she knows this,
true.
but again, and we all know that Meghan and Harry they're having their PR issues in many facets of their lives. I also no horse in that race. I kind of feel bad for them, but I don't really know enough. But I wonder, because it's funny to see two different perspectives where you were really awed, my words, not yours, by her humility. And to me, I was like, this seems so staged. That was my impulsive reaction to it. And again, I don't have any beef with SJP. It just that was the first thing that came to my mind as I listened to it.
That's totally fair. I mean, I think she does work there a couple of days a week, probably with or without a reporter. But how many celebrities or high status people would not be caught dead, like on their hands and knees with a stranger's foot in their hands?
That's true.
Even if it was for PR.
Yeah.
How many people want to send the opposite message? Only how fancy and wonderful and exclusive and all their trappings to indicate status would never have that low status, if you will, display.
Yeah.
Even if it was for the record. But that is interesting. If it was staged, that's food for thought for sure.
That's true. And yeah, I'd have to inquire as to why that would be my first impulse. Like, I don't, there might be some kind of, I'll admit that like some kind of like gendering in that where, if there was a profile of an athlete and, they're saying how there's something in my mind that, and it's more natural for an athlete to, I don't know, go for a run with one of their fans or something like that. So I admit that there probably is some kind of subconscious bias in there, but and there's something too.
Oh yeah,
I was just gonna say something too about like about a foot, right? And that's what I think that's probably one of the things that gravitated you towards that story is like like holding someone's foot is quite in the world of status a low status action.
Yeah, well, you're reminding me. Will Storr wrote a book called The Status Game. And even the question of this conversation, should we play? Will would say we are all playing status games, period, end of story. And he would say that we're playing one of three or a combination, but there are three: dominance, success, and virtue. And the latter two are prestige games. So really, you could say we're either playing a dominance game or a prestige game or some combo. In that story, if let's say, even if it was a PR campaign, that's a form of virtue status. Like, I am so humble. I am not the typical asshole rich person who doesn't need to work another day in her life, but actually wants to demonstrate humility and a sense of work ethic. And she calls herself a bitter ender, like she'll stay with things till the bitter end. But that anecdote does display a form of status, just virtue status, rather than the path of like success, fame, wealth, money status, which she already has.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm glad you brought up William Storr because that book is phenomenal and highly recommend it. But Yes, there's, what is it? Prestige games or virtue games
Yes.
and dominance games.
Dominance and
Right.
prestige. And within
Dominant.
prestige, you have success or virtue. So, for
Yeah.
example, the entrepreneur, the billionaire who still drives a beater car, like, God, his name is escaping me. Who's the jujitsu guy? Oh my
Jujitsu
gosh, his
guy.
name just flew out of my mind. He's like the king, the goat of BJJ. Anyway, for a while, he was really proud of always driving this kind of beater car. And that's a form of virtue status. He has the ultimate, utmost status within the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, no-gi, grappling. I can't believe his name flew out of my head.
Gracie? Renzo Gracie?
No, he's current.
Okay.
My husband's really into jiu-jitsu, not me, and it's been a minute. It'll come to me, I'm sure, halfway through our conversation. But when you have the billionaire driving a really old beat-up car, and they say, I don't care about status, but in a way, it's the virtue side of it when they're showing you, how humble their car is, or their clothing even. I mean, look at the billionaires wearing a sweatshirt, even if it's a high-end,
Yes.
maybe $1,000 sweatshirt.
Let me ask you, in what status game are you playing, or do you think you might be playing?
Yeah. I don't think I'm very into dominance. Dominance is more about fear and control, like the mafia or the military. That's really not my vibe. I'm all about kindness. So if anything, I'm far more on the virtue side, but with my career, I would say prestige does matter to me. In the early days, it was like getting through gatekeepers. So getting a job at Google, keeping a job at Google, making an impact at Google, landing Google as a client. That all made me feel really good. Getting my first 2 books traditionally published, getting through that tiny head of a needle, that felt really good. It was like this exclusivity of these gatekeepers. And I think because I had insecurities, that made me feel, it gave me a feeling of status that I wasn't giving to myself. And then after my first book came out, I realized my first book was called Life After College. And I didn't feel that my fellow authors, when I was networking, I didn't feel that they totally respected me or my work, because my work had nothing to do with them. And so I became kind of focused on wanting my peers to respect me. And like, for better and for worse, but with Pivot, Pivot did really well sales-wise, like probably within the top 1% of books. And so that made me feel, okay, I'm getting to where my peers and the author and entrepreneur and even podcast community respect me. And then with Free Time, a lot of them said, this book has helped me so much. People I really admire. And it was the first time people I really respect and admire said, wow, I didn't know how much I needed this book. And that validation of respect from my peers, or being able to help and contribute in some way to the people who've given me so much, even from afar as I've followed their work, that level of status, I'm really a sucker for. I really care if they respect what I'm doing. And that's, I'd say, a big pocket where I still place a lot of emphasis.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that so honestly. So I think for me, similar to you, I don't think dominance games are as important to me. Like, I'm not trying to pick fights or win fights, but they even say, when Apple tries to, when Facebook copies Instagram, Snapchat stories and makes Instagram stories, that's a form of a dominance game where it's like, I'm going to dominate you business-wise. So I'd have to think a little bit. Acquire
your company.
Yeah, I'd have to think a bit more about the dominance, because I obviously mobs and trolls and, that's not my thing. But I think that there is definitely, there's something I get a lot of self-worth from telling myself that I do something better than someone else. So I guess, but it's not, I would never say it out loud. And so I don't think that actually would qualify as a status game, because I'm not using it as relative positioning towards someone else. But we could come back to that. I'd have to think about that one a little bit more.
I know. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'll add later. I said, I know what you mean on that one.
So then it goes back to virtue and what's the other? Oh, success games. So definitely success games, kind of winning and competition. And, you and I we've spoken about, I think being on Wall Street, it's very much, it's a success game where everything is so crystal clear. It's like you're this title at this age, you get a 6-figure bonus, a 7-figure bonus, a this or that. First person to buy apartment in their peer group, first person to buy a penthouse in their peer group, right? So there's all these kind of games of signifying success. So for a long time, I was very much, and this is gonna sound weird, or maybe self-absorbed, but for a long time, kind of in my group of peers, I knew, because you can kind of extrapolate that I had earned the most money. And again, I think in that case, you don't necessarily say like, hey, I earned the most money here, but there's ways that you can demonstrate that within your peer group, right? And so there's definitely, that was one of them. And I'm doing it right here, people who have followed my story, I was one of the youngest managing directors at a large financial services firm. So probably like 10 years, or let's say 31, maybe like 8 years before the average age of that promotion. There are very few, there's not like a 7-day stretch of time when I don't remind someone that that's something that I have accomplished. Even though 8 years, it has nothing to do. And we should talk about that because it has nothing to do, but it still gives me credit. It's that trade-off with credibility and respect. I think the latest ones though now are, I don't think I flash it much, but about the like follower counts and things like that. So, I will tweet and 45,000 newsletter subscribers. I just crossed 40,000 Twitter followers. So that is a game of follower count. But I think the most subtle status game that I play is to let my peers know how much I own my time. That's kind of the ultimate flex. It's almost sometimes more of a flex than how much money you have. Is like, no one can tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Freedom. Yeah.
So freedom, time freedom. And again, there's ways that you can, I know I cut you off. There's ways that you could say that. It's like, if you look at, my Twitter bio has so much of the status games I play. It says something like surfed 1,000 days since 2018, right? That is me playing in the status game in a not so subtle way, subtle to some, not so subtle to me, of I fucking own my time, right?
Yeah, and it's such a blend. I can relate to that because it's such a blend of status and virtue. Because you're saying, it's a blend of success and virtue. Because you're saying, I'm successful enough as a business owner that I can design my time. And I've been successful enough in my career that I can even run my own business and design my time and have autonomy and time freedom. And then the virtue piece that I tap into as well, even though I don't call it that in my head, just here for this conversation, is I'm not in the rat race. I'm not on the treadmill. I'm not building somebody else's business. I'm building my own. I'm following my passion. I'm a pure creative. I won't take a job from a tobacco company. Like, there's a lot of virtue in, I spend my time the way that philosophers, say, like, where we get our meaning is from love and family and relationships. And there is a sense of virtue of I'm doing what the research shows. There's like a sense of purity, I think, like time purity that comes along with that of like the flex. Like you said, I've never really thought of it that way. And but yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, part of the reason I'm not on social media is that the volume of the status games are so
Mm.
high, I can't tolerate it. Like, I
Yeah.
just don't have a thick enough skin. I get comparison, like compare and despair. I get constantly, I feel guilty when I see what my friends are doing, and I should get in
Mm.
touch with that person, and I'm a bad networker, and I'm should be getting these like cosmetic procedures, and I should be dressing like this, and my house should look like that. And like the whole thing completely overwhelms me. But social media is status games writ large at a global scale. And so you're, again, like it's very, in some ways, unconscious. But to me, so much of every single post seems like it's
Mm.
meant to be a flex of some kind.
Mhm.
And it's just something I don't resonate. But by me saying, oh, I'm not on social media and I really haven't been active for 10 years in any meaningful way, in a way that's a virtue flex. That's
Yeah.
like, oh, well, look at me. I quit. Like,
I'm
and
so self-control. I'm so disciplined or wise or enlightened.
yeah, or
Yeah.
as if I'm not playing a status game by not being on there,
Mm.
but maybe that's a virtue game because it's like, well, I spend my time on deep work or my
Mm.
family or my dog, like how we started this conversation. And I
Yes.
also noticed myself at dinner with friends on Saturday night. And like my business, it's been a really hard year for me financially, one of the hardest I've ever had. And I realized that I'm not winning the bank account balance game at all right now. I mean, relative to so many other people in the world, yes.
Mhm.
But compared to, you've talked about this, compared to my
Yeah.
former Google friends, absolutely not. Whereas I thought my trajectory would have been like far surpassed them. I'd be making like
Mm.
millions upon millions by now,
Mm.
more. But whereas those people who stayed at the company when I left, like now they're the ones raking it in and they have the good 401k and they have all this extra stock. Anyway, so I realized that when I'm not able to play the financial status game, I default to the intellectual status. So I kind of show up as being well-read or interesting or curious
Mm.
or engaging. And then that's what I bring. So I joked to my husband, I'm like, oh, we sing for our supper. Like he's an artist and and I'm this like author podcaster. And our job isn't to have the money, it's to be interesting
Mm.
right now.
Your job is that like a self-justification, like to yourself, or do you actually
Kind of.
feel the
Or it's
need to like broadcast it, as subtle or as overt as it may be?
I think it's like almost like a status vacuum I'm imagining. But again, none of it's conscious. I'm just kind of bubbling it
Yeah.
up so we can talk about it. But it was
Mhm.
like I noticed this feeling of it's almost like a tsunami of money has gone out of my business.
Mhm.
Usually when this
I
happens,
feel
it
you.
happened. Yeah, it happened really dramatically 10 years ago. And I called that my apocalypse year. But now I know so much good comes on the other side. But it's like the tsunami, the tides roll back in such a dramatic way. And so I noticed that I could get really down on myself that I'm not showing up with all that abundant money and I don't have any of the clothes. Like it was a joke. What my husband and I chose to look through our closets, like we laughed. We're like, if only people knew we have the same 2 shirts that we wear out to nice meals. Or like I looked down, we were on the subway on our way to a Michelin star restaurant and I had the most gross like Apple Watch band. And I'm like,
Mm.
God, it's so hard to pay attention to every detail to make sure we don't look as sloppy as we actually are in our day-to-day life. So I feel like I'm not good at playing the material wealth status peacocking game. And so I just kind of realized that the way that I make up for that is the time. And I spend my time reading and like growing my mind. And that I guess it's filling an insecurity where, okay, well, then if I at least show up and be interesting or a good conversationalist, then the fact that I don't have the other status markers, well, that's not my thing. That's not what I
Mm.
bring to the table. I don't know. I'm not saying it
Yeah.
very well.
No, I think it goes, it's similar. If I'm hearing you correctly, it's similar to that. It's it's like playing the net worth game in your head. It's like you would never, or most people would never say like, oh, I have more money than you have more money than me, this person has more money. But there's this kind of, it's all happening in your head. And if one finds themselves not winning that game, then they feel shittier about themselves.
Yeah.
And so
Or like,
then,
yeah.
and so then you might kind of tell yourself a new story. It's like, oh, well, I'm way more interesting, or I'm a better father, or I'm a better this. And it's interesting. I'd have to think about this or sit with this, how what becomes an internal game, I would suspect, because we're such social beings, creeps out into external interactions. They could be really, really subtle, right? Like, I know that I do this with my friends who are crushing it financially. I'll be very quick to drop in. I'm like, yeah, surf like 20 days this month. And it'll be just like a tiny comment, but it is kind of me trying to equalize the status game, because I can't win the other game because I've opted out of it, but I still can't let go. I need to prove that I'm winning a game that they also care about. That's the thing. It's like, I'm not winning the main game or their main game, but I'm winning a game that they are intrigued by or care about. And so I need to just like put myself into that conversation just so that they hear it a little bit, right? And again, it's to make myself feel good.
So interesting. Yeah, I feel like I get insecure that sometimes I'm like, well, how do I like fill my seat at this table? I've been to fancy conferences like the TED conference where I'll be talking to an actual billionaire. And in that sense, I don't bring the $1 billion that makes me an interesting person for that person to be in conversation with. So you're right. It's like this sense of, what do I bring to the table here? Not to even out the status, but almost I'm doing it as a way to say like, oh, there's still value here for you. Like sometimes in author masterminds, my books maybe haven't sold a fraction of what other people's have, and I'll be self-conscious. Like, what am I even doing here? Who let me in? I often joke I came in through the side door. And so that's where my helpfulness, it's kind of like, I don't know if it's virtue status, but if I can give them a system, a tool, a process, a template, anything that makes their life easier. I have not won the success game, like the competition of who sold more books. I'm not even playing that game because that's never really been my driving goal.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, what other ways can I meet you, not where you are, but almost from a 90-degree angle to where you are, so that this relationship can actually happen? Because I think sometimes if the status is too one-sided, there really isn't, and it's not that we want to be in tit-for-tat relationships, but I think that it's clear if you build up enough of your own status capital in any way, whether it's time, money, connections, ideas, we all have our different gifts, then you're more interesting to people to want to get to know you and be your friend. Whereas somebody who hasn't established any of that says, can I pick your brain for coffee? It's usually a clear no.
Yes.
So on some level, having status accumulated, like it does help us. It is a form of currency.
Well, and I think that's the thing that when I got into the research of status, I was like, oh, the goal is to not play any status games. That was the theory I entered the conversation with. And like, that's what you should strive for. But I think I realized, and I knew that I played them. So I knew, and I thought that was bad. Like, play status game, bad. Strive for no, it's like the Buddha, right? Buddha wouldn't play the status game. But then, and there's a researcher, her name's Celia Longsworth. I think she's one of the main, her last name starts with an L, but she's one of the main researchers in status, I think, in the world. And she said, if you zoom out on status, we're a social species, and there's just like so many of us, right? Especially once we left, even with a small group of hunter-gatherer tribes. So as humans, we don't have the time to get to know what everyone brings to the table. And so you need to make some heuristics or some approximating assumptions, right? So I think, if you were in a tribe and you saw a very strong man, like with huge muscles, like more likely to hunt prey, good, like more of this man. Or if you saw a mother caretaking 5 kids, like, oh, great maternal protector, I want to mate with her, assuming
Yeah,
if there was no, monogamy. I'm really taking a lot of liberties here about how cavemen and women interacted.
totally.
But Cecilia's point is that the status is the way. If we looked at someone and we had no way of filtering, are they smart? Are they helpful? In the initial days, it was, are they helpful to the tribe?
Right.
Right? Then we'd be lost, right? So that would be like kind of one root of status. But then you could see, like, what about social media? It's like, am I competing against Bad Bunny for influence, or Donald Trump or whoever? It's like, just because we're on the same platform and in theory we can reach all the same people, in theory, am I playing that game? So I thought that was just like a powerful way. It's like, we're humans, we need heuristics, and
Yes.
so
I don't know if you've read Alain de Botton. My husband
oh
speaks
yes,
French, is always trying to get me to pronounce his name right.
de
I'm so
Botton, yes,
sorry, French
and
speakers.
it's
Oh, Alain. See, there we go. God,
my
I
mom's
just,
French.
I'm so bad. Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm fluent in French.
No way. Okay, you
Yeah,
say it properly. Say his full name properly so we get it.
Alain de Botton. Alain de Botton.
Oh, beautiful. So he wrote a book called Status Anxiety that is so good because he talks about the origins throughout human history, and he weaves in all these paintings from different time periods and philosophers. And he says exactly that. Like, can I read you a little excerpt
Yes,
that I
please.
pulled? Okay. He says, the attentions of others matter to us because we are afflicted by a congenital uncertainty as to our own value, as a result of which affliction we tend to allow others' appraisals to play a determining role in how we see ourselves. Our sense of identity is held captive by the judgments of those we live among. If they're amused by our jokes, we grow confident in our power to amuse. If they praise us, we develop an impression of high merit. And if they avoid our gaze when we enter a room or look impatient after we've revealed our occupation, we may fall into feelings of self-doubt and worthlessness. And he's saying that, like, in an ideal world, we would be more impermeable. We wouldn't care what anybody thought of us. But because of this evolution as social beings, as part of a broader society, like he says, our ego or self-conception could be pictured as a leaking balloon, forever requiring the helium of external love to remain inflated and ever vulnerable to the smallest pinpricks of neglect. And it's
Wow.
just so powerful. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
if we were truly, and I think this is the wisdom of aging, that as you do get more confident from the inside out, there are so many more games you can decline. Like, you just wrote about why not to get the Porsche. And I know you talked about that with Paul as well in the kickoff episode. I do think there is a certain awareness that when you go, like Luke Burgess talks about this in Wanting, another amazing book that I love in this area of conversation. We can at least be aware that we're mimetic creatures. We see, therefore we want. We think that we want, therefore I am. And if we could just pause before we keep acquiring things on the hedonic treadmill, something you write about all the time and curate such good articles about, we could at least be a little more intentional. Am I really pouring my time, money, energy, and attention into things that nourish me personally versus things that our peers might acknowledge from the outside, or peers, anybody at any level of society might acknowledge from the outside as being valuable.
And it's so like watching it go through, because I still do think that, so for example, prestige games, right?
Yeah.
We were talking before, you don't introduce yourself as having worked at Google, and I introduced you as being a Zoogler. And the reason why is I know that my listeners, if I say that you worked at Google, it instantly boosts your status, your prestige in their eyes, which makes them more likely to listen to the episode. It's like, it's that simple, right? And so there's a part of me that says, I could be the purest, most enlightened version of myself and say, I'm not going to, you didn't ask me to say or not say Google, but I'm not going to say Google. And then less people will listen to what I think, you could call this my art, you could call this my business. And so it's like this weird, the weird dynamic. And I'll say it even more bluntly. It's like the fact that I went to Yale changes the way people look at me when I enter a conversation. It's that filtering mechanism, right? It's like the hunter-gatherer who had the biggest muscles. Like you just look at them and you're like, this person, good hunter, right? And so you go into a new room and like this person, Yale, people act differently towards you when they find out that you went to Yale. And do you not say it because you don't want to flex or you don't want it to be a part of your identity? Or do you say it because, actually many good things can happen because you hold that status. It's a weird, and I think as you can think about, you brought up aging. It's like, if I had 10 days to live, no one gives a fuck that I went to Yale, right?
Yeah.
But if I have 20 years to live, it might matter.
Know. But then isn't it so interesting what the gap, what we perceive? And here's my question. Who are you trying to attract? So I stopped trying to attract people who wanted me to like wave a really braggadocious flag in order to listen to me. Like, that's not that interesting to me. I will say, I've been your friend now for a little while, not as long as some of your others, but I never knew you went to Yale. And the reason that I'm drawn to you and to your podcast is because it did impress me how many RadReads subscribers. I thought, wow, you've really built a substantial community here. And as soon as I became a subscriber, I love your content. I really love what you curate. You think how I think. Like, you're picking stuff that I'm genuinely so curious to read every week and that adds to my knowledge base. And then third, when you said you were launching this podcast, I genuinely wanted to listen, not because you went to Yale, because I know who you are and the people you curate and the types of conversations you would be sure to have. And so it was very interesting to me. And also, assuming you know what your listeners want, I wonder how many listeners care at all that I worked at Google versus this is a friend of Kay, this is a friend of RadReads.
Yeah.
She must have something interesting to say. Let me wait and find out what that is. I just wonder, like, maybe it's both. Maybe it's like important to have both. Because I agree, if I didn't have any credibility, then there's no point to listen to me talk for almost 2 hours. Like, you do want to be picky with who you're taking in information from, because if you don't respect them or their lifestyle or their approach to things, you definitely shouldn't be taking their advice.
Yeah. I love how you framed it. And thank you for saying that about RadReads, because I still get attached to it. Like, if you look at the language that I use, so to some extent, I am attracting people that care about my status in certain ways. And I'd have to think about why I'm doing that. Is it good business? Is it make me feel good? Or there's a charitable interpretation where it's like the people that care about those things are the ones most ready for the message, right? And so if I never talked about Wall Street, the people from Wall Street who read what I write are the most impacted by it. But if I never waved the Wall Street status flag, they would never give me the credibility to listen, right? So
That's true.
It's so intermingled, right?
So once you wave the Wall Street flag, which I agree, that's an important part of your story, and it's an important path that you gave up to do what you're doing now. Where does the Yale piece fit in? Like, what do you think that waving that flag, so you have the big flag that really shortcuts what you're about and where you've come from. What do you think it's sort of the Yale flag does for you, status-wise?
Status-wise, let's see. So I mean, I always think about kind of, we moved to a new town like 4 years ago. So that's kind of where status gets reset a bit, because, people don't really know you. And so I always think about what are kind of the early markers in a conversation with a new group of peers, right? So yeah, I don't talk that much about Yale. To some extent, I view Yale and Wall Street as very similar, right? It implies like a certain amount of intellect, right? I care, whether RadReads existed or not, I care if people think I'm smart. Like, it's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm losing the train of thought a little bit on your question, but the Wall Street flag is definitely like, I'm successful. And then the Yale flag is kind of, it's a mix, right? It's kind of, I'm successful and I'm smart. I think that, if I really go deep though, I think that there's these like fears of rejection. There's fears of like being perceived as a good person. And I think society as a whole, they're like, oh, if you're smart, you're more likely to be good. Maybe that's a story I need to unpack, but it's maybe the stigma of Yale is more negative now, like in the phase of late capitalism. But I think that they're kind of, they in the book From Strength to Strength, Arthur Brooks talks about an executive on Wall Street who's very unhappy. And she is working so hard, doesn't see her family, I think has been divorced. And he says something like, he probes, why do you do all these things? And she says, I'd rather be special than happy.
Oh,
and
interesting.
I don't fully agree. I don't agree with that statement, but I definitely feel resonance in that statement. There's something about feeling, I guess I care about feeling special. And so the different markers are ways that help me feel special.
That makes sense. And it's true that these very traditional gatekeepers in society, like universities, elite institutions, companies, again, publishing houses, that immediately gives you a badge of status honor just by them picking you. What's interesting to me is if I were one of the parents at school pickup, you might never tell me you went to Yale, but I would know if you're intelligent within 5 minutes of speaking with you. So it's interesting what we think. Oh, well, if I drop this bit of information, they'll think that I'm smart. And also, there's no doubt they'll talk to you for 10 minutes and they'll figure it out as well that you're really smart. And there's some subversive game that I enjoy playing with my husband. Like, I joke that I wear frump court as my style when I'm walking Rider because I actually don't want a lot of attention on the streets of New York. I kind of want to blend in and be invisible. And it's kind of come into meeting people. I don't say much at all. I like for it to be a real secret who I am, what I do. And if they figure it out, then it's a fun surprise. What I've done, I remember many years ago, Ramit Sethi saying he split tested, telling people in a bar that he was a writer versus that he was an author. And saying he was an author got so many oohs and ahs and follow-up questions. And so I've always said I'm an author, which is true because so much of my life extends from the 3 books. But lately, I don't even lead with that. And I kind of find it fun to not drop any status markers. And then it might even be like 3 months later and they find out some bit of info. And they're like, oh, I had no idea. And I don't know, there's like something about that I find entertaining.
I think that's a bit, there is, that's why I never ask people the question, what do you do? And if anything, it's how do you spend your time? But even then there might be, it's funny because there might be a little bit of status. There might be a status game just in asking the question that way. It's like, I'm above asking the question, what do you do? Right? It's so weird how intertwined, but I do. So I don't ask, what do you do? And I try. The interesting thing about where I live, so I moved from New York City, Brooklyn to LA and Southern California. And we live in a beach town, Manhattan Beach. But the people here don't really talk about what do you do. It's not really very high on the list of conversations. And it's kind of nice. But then after like 3 or 4 months, you realize like people still don't talk about what they do. And it's like your curiosity, like the New Yorker gene in me is like, I just want to know what you do. And so that's its own interesting dynamic. But I wanted to share something actually yesterday that came up. I was texting, or my wife was texting, and my 5-year-old looked at her phone and saw that the bubbles, the text bubbles were green. And she's only used to seeing blue text bubbles, and there was something wrong with her, that she saw something wrong. Like she was really like intrigued. Why is it green? And I thought about that in the context of how early this programming starts. And again, my daughter doesn't know that green is bad or good, or blue is bad or good. And for those, in the off chance you don't know what I'm talking about, a blue text bubble means you have an iPhone, and a green text bubble means you have an Android phone or a non-iPhone. And it's you could actually say that that's a dominance game by Apple to kind of like put themselves above another thing. So, and this matters less outside of the US, where most people use WhatsApp. So there's much deeper, WhatsApp is the main texting. But at 5, my daughter has built some kind of reference point that majority of texts are blue and minority are green. At some point, she'll have a phone, and some version of that, will likely trickle into whatever she perceives about phones. And so I just thought it was fascinating how, because what we're saying is, there's one argument where it's like you can't escape them, and you could look at my 5-year-old as being quite pure right now in the game of status for now, but she's already getting these markers through her stories. So
completely. Well, I remember being really young and pretty early age. You can see what kids have new, fresh clothes all the time. What brands are those clothes? Oh, I remember thinking, can I get this Gap sweater? And it was like, we'll pick one. You can't have all 3. And this was really young. Or you have play dates at somebody's house. Why is their house 5 times the size of ours? Or you see their car when their parents pick them up. And I do think that it kind of, or maybe it's not even like, are your parents picking you up at all? Like that's a form of status of some kind versus my parents worked full time. And so it's like, is a nanny picking you up? Are you getting forgotten at school because nobody remembered to pick you up? Versus like, oh, your mom is there, and the proverbial mom that bakes cookies and that has all the kids over because you have the cool house and the pool in the backyard. And so I feel like there are a lot of status symbols and games that we do become aware of from a very, very young age, which would make sense going back to our evolution as tribes people, that those skills would be built in probably from a very early age. Just like you were saying with your daughter.
And I think one of the things I love that point about letting the mystery, when you meet someone new, the mystery infuse the combination. So how does that actually play out? Do you speak less and listen more? Or like, let's say you meet a stranger at the dog park. Obviously you'll go through there's probably dog banter.
Yeah.
And once you kind of exhaust the dog banter, is there a way you think about the conversation proceeding?
Well, I mean, it's funny because like right away they'll see that I'm wearing Crocs, and they'll see that I don't have fancy nails, and that they'll even probably see that I don't have Botox. You know what I mean? I'm turning 40 this year, but I don't want it. Like I wrote down a little note to myself to write about my favorite wrinkles, and my favorite ones are the ones, my smile lines around my eyes, and I don't want to make them go away, but that's maybe virtue status. I'm so virtuous, I don't want Botox. I'm going to reject it, So again, I'm not exempt from the unconscious level of game playing, but I think the way that it would play out would just be, even if they ask me, what do I do? I might say, oh, I'm an author and a podcaster, but I'm not going to drop the comfortable markers. That's a challenge I gave myself a long time ago, because when I first left Google, when my first book was coming out, every interview I did, people would put in the headlines, and I'll just drop some CNBC, Business Insider, it felt good to get those platforms interested in me, but they would always put the headline, former Googler, ... And so while I rode the status train, I call it the comfy shade of the big corporate tree that I was sitting under, I kind of leaned really heavily on it while I worked there, so much so that I thought I had no value to people if I didn't work there, because even author friends would write to me because I helped manage the Talks at Google program for a period of time. And it's almost like I kind of knew that they were writing to me to get a talk at Google, not because of who I was. Like it almost had nothing to do with me as a person. So I was very insecure that on the other side, I would be like lost in the sea. Like you said, I'd just be lost at sea. I wouldn't be interesting to anybody anymore. And so when all these people, including myself, used to always say like former Googler, and they'd put it in all the headlines, I made myself stop introducing myself at parties and I used to work at Google, or anytime I would drop the G word. And you even asked in my bio to introduce me. And I said, no, I don't say that, because that's my challenge to myself, not to rely on it like a crutch, like a comfortable, safe status crutch. And then I don't mind if it comes up in conversation. So I swung back the pendulum the other way at some point, and you'll see in Pivot, I don't say best-selling author. I say co-creator of Google's Career Guru program on the cover, because I am really proud of that program. It's a global drop-in coaching program. I'm so proud of what I created. But that's that intellectual, project-based, creative status piece that I value, rather than the competition side of like best-selling. I care more the thing I created. And so anyway, long story short, I don't mind if things come up that are part of my past. I'm trying not to lean on them like a crutch. That's all. That's the difference. It's just an exercise. It's like a game I play with myself.
No, it's super inspiring, because it's funny. This is how intertwined status is, because I was looking on your book cover to see if you used the phrase best-selling, because I don't know if that's what qualifies. I don't know the logistics of that. I know New York Times is a more strict cutoff, obviously. But I went in and I don't think on free time, I think it said acclaimed author and not best-selling author.
Award-winning. And Free Time did win 6 awards, which I'm very proud of. Yeah.
So, but it's so funny, because I was looking for the more like Google and best-selling. I was looking for the status. So you were even removed. Like I was bringing you into a whole set of status games that you have consciously chosen to opt out of, right? And it just shows like how intertwined it all is. But let me ask you on the Google thing, if there was something that, if you knew it could help something for you, whether it was a business opportunity or if you were single, like it could help you attract the right mate, whatever, it could lead to something. Would you still use that challenge and not bring it up early in the conversation? Or how would you approach that?
Yeah, like let's say I'm talking to a potential licensing client.
Perfect.
Yeah, I would say, and my clients include X and Y and drop the big names, which a lot of big clients make you put in an NDA that you're not even going to say publicly that you work with them and that you won't put their logos on your website. So there's a lot of even legal reasons not to shout that from the rooftops, as much as I wish I could sometimes. But yeah, certainly I'm, I guess, a little more private about it. And I find it quite obnoxious. Bios that are just like every possible status marker under the sun and the best this and the number one this and the leading this. And like, I just find it a little bit histrionic for my taste. And so I like to go the other way and then again, surprise people. But I think what's smart about UK is that you're saying, well, I know my audience and I know who I attract and I want to give you the best chance to be heard by them. So you're sort of picking the salient bits and weaving them back in. And so I do think that we're always making those calls, and it's interesting to make them consciously versus unconsciously. I guess that's the thing. Like to me, when somebody has too many superlatives in their bio, it actually comes across to me like you're trying too hard, or are you insecure about your work? Like, can the work stand on its own? But I know you're right that probably for 90% of the rest of the world, or maybe even 99, that stuff works. So I don't know. I find it a little bit of a turnoff. And I guess I find that for the people I enjoy attracting and building community with, they see through it. But also, I don't want anybody to think I'm up on some high expert ledge. I'm really not. So a lot of my podcast episodes, I even say this is not the way, it's just one way. I'm not the expert. This is just what I've learned along the way. And that's really the perspective I take, because I don't want to be put on some pedestal that I don't need to be on. You know?
Yes. I love you said you something like you are what you attract, right? I think this is an amazing way for us to wrap, because you said, like, if you put in let's just use a bio. You put in no status markers, you might actually miss some of the people that you want to attract. That's like put in like, or actually, maybe, I mean, that's even subject for debate, right?
Or is the work good enough that people love it and they tell a friend, and then I don't know. I guess I'm open. I guess I'm willing to take a slightly winding road to just test those assumptions. Let's put it that way.
I love that. And then on the other hand, if you put zero status markers, then it is the purity of the craft, right? Where even if you just said, I worked at Google and I went to Yale,
right?
It could potentially open up the aperture. But again, some people genuinely don't care, right? They're probably more on the, and like, I was thinking about it. If you had like 10 days to live, like, how would you write your bio,
That's a good question. Yeah.
And then on the other hand, though, if you're just those, like, we've all seen those bios, like boom, boom, like so much stuff, you're actually turning people off. So there is this kind of curve where, this is kind of, and maybe we'll wrap with this. The way I approach it, I love to think how you kind of sum this all up. But the way I see it is, a little bit of markers just to rally your group, just to kind of rally the attention towards you. And again, it begets you need the attention. But if you go too far, and we didn't even talk about the fact that there's a lot of studies that being higher status is good for your health. And that because status can confer other opportunities.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Again, if you go back to the tribes, if you were low status, you didn't eat. Right. Yeah. So we'll save that for another podcast. But then when you reach that point of, then it has diminishing returns, where the bio has 100 best of this, and then you actually hurt yourself because you've done too much status and people are turned off by it, right? So it's like, I kind of vision this like this curve where it's like a little bit to put out your bat signal.
Right.
And then ease off, because I think then you kind of get in the land of, insecurity and so on. So anyway, what are your takeaways from our conversation today?
Yeah, so much. Well, for starters, I have to close a loop. Gordon Ryan is the no-gi BJJ Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu reigning champ. And he's playing dominance games, of course, because he's winning every single match consecutively for years. And he's big and strong, and he's got that alpha male, pure alpha male dominance game and success. I love to, again, go back to Paul, your first guest. We talked about status as well. And he said, I'm not playing status games. If any, I want the status of generosity. And I love that he said that. And now, we could put it in the virtue bucket, but I love that too. Like being known as a generous person and being part of the gift economy, or supporting work that you love, or paying people more than they tell you their quoted rate is. Like, I love that. And I do a lot of that as well, because I kind of believe in karma and the golden rule. And I just think if I put good energy out there and abundant thinking and generosity, it feels so good to me to do that in and of itself. And then I do think it attracts really like-minded people. I guess what you're saying, Kay, I love you're saying, like, find the middle path, find the happy medium with this stuff, and just be really mindful, because it's probably very easy to tip over into mistaking that all of those status markers, that you need them to impress people, or that you are interesting or valuable because of these different status games. And then it becomes the hungry ghost of money, fame, power, control, where you can never have enough. And you write about this all the time, and you find so many great pieces of very quickly I think we get overly obsessed and we externalize our happiness thinking that if we just collect one more status bubble, or I get the right purse or the right shoes or the right car, that's going to fix something on the inside. So I guess it's about constantly going back to that quote from Status Anxiety of how do we continue bolstering ourselves from the inside and living according to our values, like being a good dog mom and a good wife and a good sister and daughter and business owner and manager. All those things are super important to me. So how do we keep bolstering ourselves from the inside, bringing real value? You're right. Status opens doors, like period, end of story. And it's fun when those doors swing open for you. But I do think that it's like, pick the games you want to play. Try not to tip over into obsession or externalizing validation, because then it will lead to less happiness, not more. But if you pick the games you want to play with the people you have fun playing them with in the way that you enjoy playing, that's intrinsically rewarding, then ideally it's a virtuous cycle of we all build each other up. Like, I've been looking forward to this conversation for weeks since we scheduled it, just because this is so fun. And I really thank you, Kay, for launching this and having the conversations, because I've also gained so much listening to them just because of how real they are. And so I really want to acknowledge you. And that's actually has nothing to do with any of the status symbols that you've acquired thus far. It's because of who you are.
Yeah. So thank you. What a beautiful way to wrap. I've learned so much from you as well. And really, you're really making me see a lot of the conversations in these podcasts have come to, like, what is your essence? What is one's essence? And the essence of generosity of spirit, the essence of curiosity, the essence of love and compassion and empathy, right? Those are, I don't know, call them games, whatever, like, do more of those.
Right.
Right. And know that people are so much more those things than whatever label, marker, game, shoe, or fancy car. So I thank you, Jenny. The last question: any creator, up and coming creator that you want to shout out, or someone that is doing some cool work?
I'm going to give my friend Sarah Young a shout out, because she also lives by so many of these values. And she's just one of the brightest people I know and one of the best friends I'm fortunate to have. I always say, like, anyone should be so blessed to have a friend like her. And she's running a thriving business, and she does this great Friday Favorites newsletter. So you can check her stuff out at zingcollaborative.com/FridayFaves.
Woo! I will check out Sarah's work. I was not familiar with it.
She's awesome.
Awesome. And where can people go find out more about you?
Sure. Yeah. You can search for... Yes, I have 2 podcasts. You can search for Pivot with Jenny Blake or Free Time with Jenny Blake, wherever you're listening to or watching this. And if you visit itsfreetime.com/toolkit, there's all kinds of tools and templates where, you'll make me feel good, high status by making your life easier. But also you can free up some of your time, some of the things that we touched on. So that's itsfreetime.com. And the book, of course.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. This was such a joy.
Likewise. What a delight to be here. Thanks, everybody, for listening and watching.